everybody, welcome to Chatty Bumpkin. So super excited today because we've got a very special guest, one of our fabulous franchisees, Vanathi. I don't know your surname, actually. What's your
Webster.
Webster. Amazing. It's not a tricky one. So welcome. We're so happy to have you. Thank you so much for your time today. Do you want to kind of tell us a bit about yourself? Who are you?
I'm Vanathi Webster. I am the owner of Children Inspired by Yoga in South Tyneside, which is up in the northeast. Prior to owning this business, I was a primary school teacher for 17 years, teaching in the UK, and I taught in Qatar and Singapore. I guess a bit in Canada. I trained in Canada, and yeah, I've been practicing yoga for a lot of my life. Found it when I was in university, and it's always sort of been there in the background of my life. And yeah, I just really wanted to be able to share this passion with children and really focus on their well-being. I've got a background in developmental psychology. So this program is really beautiful because it blends a lot of what I did in teaching with that passion and that background with developmental psychology as well.
Oh, fantastic. So when you say you've got a background in developmental psychology, I get very excited chatting to you because you are so interesting. Just no pressure. So obviously you worked as a primary school teacher. So where does the developmental psychology come into it?
So I did my undergrad in developmental psychology. I focused all my modules, courses in developmental psychology. I was really interested in how children learn, really interested in their cognitive development and their social development. And then I took a little break from teaching and I did a master's. So my master's was again in developmental psychology, and I worked at the Anna Freud Centre, who does a lot of research actually with schools to support schools and children in schools with well-being, with child development, with working with children with trauma as well. Learned a lot there and did a couple of years as a research assistant. So I guess you would say I was a research psychologist, and the projects I was working on was again looking at improving children's well-being, but from a community perspective. So we were doing a lot of work in schools, surveying children to try to improve their community, to support their well-being. So I did lots of work with them with that. I've worked on a couple of other projects. I worked with one charity that worked with young offenders being reintegrated back into the community, using music as an avenue or as a tool to be able to bring them out, get them talking. So I did a bit of research with them to speak about, like it was an evaluation on that program, to speak about how they found it, how they've sort of worked music through their life and what that sort of meant for them. So it's been a really beautiful sort of learning journey with that, to understand. Most of that sort of research was with school-age children and adolescents, whereas when I was studying it, I was studying it more from sort of an early years, toddlers, babies. I did a lot of baby observations and toddler observations, matching that up to theory. Yeah.
Do you have like a favourite? Was there a particular part that you enjoyed most?
At the time, I was really passionate and really interested in adolescent and youth psychology, and really wanting to change their community and their environment. I really felt for children. I used to teach in London. I lived in London. I grew up in London, and I really used to feel for them, because you looked around and there was nothing for them to do. And not only that, but they are very much villainized, and you sort of look at them and you think they're villainized by adults, but they're children, and they're groups of children. You know, they are still children, and you can understand why. Like when you're in London, when you see a group of children, well, a group of youth, it can be really intimidating. So I used to teach in Camden, and they were challenging children, but a lot of the children I used to teach in primary school obviously then did go on to secondary school. And you did used to see them in a group and think, I think I might cross the road actually. And sometimes I would. but it was really at the back of my mind. I had to sort of remind myself, I'm like, they're 11, they're 12, they're 15, and they're finding their way. They're finding their way through this crazy world that we live in. And then there are these adults around them that treat them like they're villains.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, people present what you think they are as well. So then it's interesting, isn't it? When if you treat teenagers like that, then they act out more, and then that kind of creates more of that. Do you agree? I don't know. That's how I always think. Like people present what you expect from them.
What else do you have to live up to if someone's going to treat you like a demon and think you're evil? How, as a child, are you going to have that sort of resilience to be able to think, no, I'm going to change that. I'm going to convince them otherwise. That bit within you, it can be taught, but that comes out in us later, and it takes a certain recipe, I suppose, to be able to build someone up to actually be like, no, actually, I'm not that person that you I am. So I was really, really fascinated with a lot of that. Obviously teaching those children and thinking, they used to tell me, no, there's nothing for me to do, miss. We can't even, they couldn't play balls on their estate.
Yeah, that's really hard.
Saying like no ball games, and I'm thinking, why?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because when I grew up in North Devon, it's very green, there's beaches, and we used to think, oh, there's nothing to do here. I wish we lived in a city. But actually looking back, you think, wow, we had so much space. We had the beach, there was really, okay, so there wasn't a cinema. Well, there wasn't a cinema or like a cafe or somewhere you could go, and when you're a kid, you think that's what you need, but really what you need is space to play and play ball, like you said, play football, whatever it is for boys, and do whatever you need to do. And that I've never really considered that. I always thought it must be great to be an inner city kid, but actually there's no space. There's really nothing you can do, is they just hanging out on the side of a street.
Yeah, and they're not even allowed to do that. They're not allowed to go into shops unless there's like only 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to go, and then all like sort of like the community centres don't really exist, or have places for them. Like youth centres don't really exist anymore. So just that space for them to hang out, really, it doesn't exist. So I did really, really feel for them, and you could just really see that they were misplaced or displaced in a city. And when things like the riots came up, I thought about it even more, and I thought, wow, like they're displaced and they're angry, like really angry, and they're children. That was something that I was just really, really interested in.
Yeah, I can see why. So that was you did developmental psychology as your undergrad. So how did you then move into teaching?
So how did I move into teaching? I think from that, I always wanted to work with children. And I toyed with the idea of going into clinical work and following that route. And I thought, actually, I'm not going to spend a lot of my time with children if I do that. Like, if I looked at my work week, how often would I actually be with children? It'd be a lot of paper pushing and filling out papers and lots of meetings. And that's not the bit I wanted to do. I really wanted to work like on the forefront, working with them every day, being able to support them, and really enjoy them. Like, it's amazing being with children. You don't get the same day twice, and it's not boring. And I really didn't want to be bored at work. So I thought I'll teach. I'll be with them all the time.
Oh, and so then obviously you taught for 17 years. I'm like, fast forward 17 years. What age group did you teach?
All of them. Yeah, all of them. I've taught year 1. As a class teacher, I was like year 1, year 3, year 5. As an intervention teacher, year 2, year 6. I did PPA cover, supply teaching, so I've taught them all. I used to be PPA cover for reception in early years. When I was in Singapore, I was working in a preschool, so I taught the early years then. And when I was in Qatar, it was mostly what would be Key Stage 1, so year 1, year 2. So yeah, taught them all.
Oh, fantastic. And then you've transitioned, obviously, now your career's transitioned now to become a Children Inspired by Yoga franchisee. So how did you end up, what sort of created that transition?
I call it pandemic perspective. A lot of people have this, where you sort of start to realize that you are waiting to live the life that you want to live. And my retirement dream, I don't think I'm one to not work. And I don't mean work as in to earn, but I always need to be doing. So I was like, when I retire, I'm going to be an adult yoga teacher. I'm going to go off to Bali or wherever it is, do my yoga training and teach and live this life wherever I want. And then the pandemic happened, and I thought, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to teach as a primary school teacher with my 2 young children. It wasn't going to be a balance I could maintain. And I thought, well, what do I want to do? Why am I waiting? And I kept seeing, I can't even remember where or how. I think there was a website for people that have been teachers, sort of moving on from their career. And I saw a little post for children's yoga teacher. And I was like, well, it wasn't intentionally what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an adult yoga teacher, but wouldn't it make more sense if I was a children's yoga teacher? Because I love working with children and all my background is with children. And the more I read into the company, what really spoke to me was that element of that child development, like that theory is there on how children work, what to do to regulate them, how their brain works, how their body works, and mostly how their body works, which feeds into, what's happening up here. And I thought, well, this I understand, and this I know, and this I love. This is what our education system actually should be more based on, is actually taking into consideration all of this. And the well-being aspect, obviously, was something that I always threaded into my practice, but always found it really difficult for it to be sort of acknowledged as needed. And I thought, well, how beautiful is this, that I'd be able to do both of this. These are both of my passions, and that I'd be able to support children during their day at school or at nursery to support their development, and give them those tools in life that a lot of adults don't have and are now really struggling with their daily life because of, the impact of things that are happening around us. I was listening to the news, I think it was yesterday, and they were talking about the amount of people that are calling in sick, and how it's most likely because of stress. And you think, well, now it's starting to impact our workforce, and it's starting to impact our economy. And, will those adults that sit in those places where they can actually change things recognize the fact that if you've got adults that don't know how to manage stress and are working and burning out, that they end up actually not going to work and on sick pay, and that's not actually going to be good in the bigger picture for our economy and the world that we live in. But the children that I'm teaching are going to recognize that they need a rest, and it's okay to have that rest. And if they are finding something tricky, they've now been taught something that they could potentially use if it feels good to them, to be able to manage those tricky moments when they eventually come along. So that's how I found it. And I thought, why am I going to wait till I'm 60? Well, I probably physically couldn't do it anyways. But yeah, you live through it, right?
And so obviously you touched on, I know when we were chatting previously, and I sort of said, like, we're going to just talk and you can tell me what you're passionate about, and you've already touched on that very briefly then. Could we kind of elaborate a bit more? I know you kind of went into a little tiny bit on physical health with children, and also teaching them to recognize when they need to rest. So if we start with going a little bit more into kind of, because I think when I've said to you, like in the voice note, tell me what you're passionate about, you really were talking about physical health and physical development.
Yeah, I think if I was talking about physical as well, but I'm thinking about like our younger children. So when I'm in our nurseries, like I always tell the girls that I work with, like when we're delivering the program, obviously each client is looking to our program to provide different things for them. So when we're working in the nurseries, one of the things that they obviously do really enjoy about our program is the speech and language aspect of it, because we've got stories in there. It obviously it builds their vocabulary, it builds their language skills. They've got visuals to be able to anchor those words onto. So that's a lot of what we're trying to teach the children, but also any of the adults that we're working with, to be able to build their vocabulary, giving them that multi-sensory avenue to be able to learn, so that their memory has different anchors to be able to take on that information. But we also give them that opportunity to speak if they want. And that's something that is really big for children, actually. Like there's a lot of brain power that goes into actually speaking, something that we as adults take for granted. And I think the only way that I've been able to really connect with how difficult it is to speak is when someone asks you a question when you're really, really tired, and you have to really stop and think. And being a sleep deprived mum, sometimes when I've had to fill out forms and it says name, I know what it's asking me, but it takes me a really long time to actually fill this out. And or you go to the doctors and they're like, well, what's your name? And you're like, I do know my name, but I'm so sleep deprived that it's actually when someone is asked a question, there's actually a lot more that your brain is having to process, and it's questions actually that your brain has to process. Whereas if a child is speaking freely, that is less taxing on them in terms of their energy. So actually giving those children that time to be able to speak when they're little, if they want, but giving them that, actually sort of thinking, okay, I've got to give them that time for their brain to actually work. But then it also develops their confidence, because they're having to speak to someone they don't see every day. So when I do have children that actually come and speak to me when they're that little, I think, oh, that's amazing. Like that's actually a really lovely gift for me. But to me, what that shows me is how confident that child is. And that is the confidence element of the program that we bring in. From a physical development aspect, there's a lot of what we do that focuses on those developing that gross motor skills, developing that core strength. And a lot of the time I'm constantly saying to the older ones, actually, like, oh, are your shoulders hurting when you're doing this? And I said, does it hurt when you write? And you write for a long time. And we talk about building these big muscles that we want to actually use to work these little muscles. And more often than not, they've gotten into this bad habit of using the little muscles to do everything, which is causing them pain and discomfort. And then they don't like writing, or their handwriting won't be very nice. So when they're little, to be able to build those big muscles for them. And this is stuff that I didn't know before I started teaching yoga. I always knew that, outdoor learning and children being active was really good for their whole development. You don't want them sitting still. And if you don't get them to use those muscles, they're not going to be used and developed, really. So giving children at a young age all of that exposure is brilliant for them. But that's how it impacts when they're older, which is something that I've learned from being a Children Inspired by Yoga franchisee and teacher. But with the little ones, like the weather can impact whether they go out or not, or the space that they've got. So when they're engaged in our classes, they don't even realize it, but they're getting that opportunity to use all of those muscles and to build those leg muscles, which are going to help them, those little babies, to actually start to bear weight. There's a lot of babies that we're starting to see in our work where they're not walking at 12 months. They're walking or starting to walk closer to the 17, 18 month, which is that window that you get. And, as a parent, I remember, like, you're told like they start walking at 1, and maybe a while ago that was the case. Like with my first daughter, she wasn't far off. And in the cohort of babies I knew around then, that was the marker. But now it's not, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. Like my second daughter was a late walker, but being a Children Inspired by Yoga teacher, I knew what I could have done to support those muscles, to help her on that journey. And I think it's another really lovely thing about the program to be able to support the key workers or the parents that we work with, to be able to help them feel like they are working on that child's development, and they will get there when they get there, but to be able to support that muscle development, to encourage their support their physical development.
Is there anything kind of that parents could do at home? So obviously things that raise to mind for a pre-writing skill is if you're being a cat or lion and you're on one hand and you're shaking the other hand. I'm not doing the best example here, but hopefully if you imagine I'm being a cat, so I'm on my hands and knees and I'm shaking my paws, it's strengthening, you know, you're on one arm, so you're strengthening your shoulders and things like that. But is there anything else that you could think of specifically where, again, it's just what I love as well is that we make it fun, so we're just being animals and things like that, but then that in turn stimulates that growth and those muscles. Is there anything you could think of that you're like, oh, this is a really easy thing to be at home, like if you're struggling with, if you feel like you would, you know, we talking about walking right now, is there anything you think they could be doing or that kind of ties into our programs, whether it's being an animal or anything like that you think?
Definitely being animals like dog and cat are ones that I do encourage parents to do, but also when they do see their child sort of moving around, to be supporting their core. So stabilizing their hips will give them a bit of that feeling of balance in terms of what they need to be able to reach out. Like I did that a lot with my eldest daughter. She was very determined to crawl and just wasn't getting there, but she struggled to bear that weight on her knees. So when I used to stabilize her with her hips, just for her to get that feeling, and you can't do it for too long, and they'll tell you when they're not happy, but it just gives them a bit of that feeling, so they can start to go, okay, that's what it feels like if I'm going to be a bit more steady. But also I've noticed that children, when they like furniture surfing in terms of walking, so they're bearing that weight on their legs, doing our pedaling, like we pedal when we pedal to the giggle tree, the jumps that we do for rabbit with our baby yoga, it's building their leg muscles as well, which is eventually going to help them with that weight bearing. So when they get to a certain age, past sort of 5 or 6 months, when you can sort of hold their legs a little bit and they'll start to push back, and you want them to start to do that so that they build that leg muscle. But I remember with my eldest daughter, we used to play a lot in the back of our house in the kitchen, and we had this really lovely play space for her. And I was like, she's still not really like pulling herself up and trying to bear weight. Like even on her cot, she wasn't doing it. And then I looked around at the space and I'm like, well, there's nothing for her to pull herself up on. So I bought one of those little activity tables. And sure enough, she was so curious. She would fall over and she was really starting to do it. And I started to spend a bit more time in other parts of the house where she had furniture that she could pull herself up on. And she was doing it loads after that. And I realized I didn't give her the opportunity to. So doing things like that can really help. And then I think it was with my second daughter, I realized like she could climb up the stairs, but she wasn't walking. And again, that's developing all of those muscles, and you do need your core strength to be able to climb. So I think sometimes with some children, climbing comes before walking, which we don't think of ourselves, but it takes a little bit less of that less core strength in a way. They're building it by climbing, but to walk and balance on 2 feet upright is a lot. So I also tell parents, which is things that we've learned in our program, when you're teaching them to walk, and I'm guilty of this, we always instinctively think to hold their hands, and that's really difficult for them to find and feel that balance. And whilst it's really awkward for us, actually holding them under their arms gives them a lot more of that steady support to be able to feel that balance, and then feel more confident to take it. And even with walking, like sometimes it is still a confidence thing for some of them. Like it is scary to think I'm going to be all the way up here, and if I fall, for a baby, that feels really huge for them. And there's also thinking about like the emotional aspect of separation anxiety when it comes to them starting to move away from mum. For some children, that can be a lot. Like I remember I actually gave my youngest a little pep talk. I'm like, I know you can do this. You can do this, and I'm right here with you. And it was really weird. I don't know, like, I think she took it on board, but she did. She took her first few steps after we gave her a bit of encouragement. Like, you can do
some positive affirmation.
yeah, like, I know you can do this. You've got this. We're right here. And she took 1 or 2 steps, and I was like, I'm taking that. You did it. Yay.
Yay. Oh,
But
so
they
good.
do need a bit of that sort of that verbal coaching, which,
And
maybe
even if they can't understand the words, they can hear the energy and feel your intention.
yeah, I do think they know what you're trying to say, even if they don't fully understand, yeah, like verbatim what you're saying. They know what you're saying is it's going to be all right, and that they can do it, and yeah, they do respond to it. So all for that as well.
Thanks. And then you also mentioned about, so when we were talking a moment ago and you were talking about adults and stress and people calling in sick because they are ultimately so stressed and they just can't handle. I think people are at capacity and don't know how to take a break, and so what happens is they go and then they can no longer go, like it's literally like can't face the world for that day. And so you were sort of saying in our lessons, we teach rest and we really teach self-regulation and reflection and sort of just asking ourselves more than anything, like, how do I feel? You know what? I'm tired. I'm going to have a rest, or I feel like this. And same for you were saying the adults in the classes, so the practitioners in the nurseries or schools are learning as well. Could you sort of, for any parents that are listening, maybe give them an idea of how they could incorporate that into being at home and how they could possibly teach their children to do that, to be still, or to recognize, because not everybody is going to be able to come to our classes, because although we are national, we're not everywhere, and we teach predominantly in schools and nurseries, so ultimately it might be that there isn't a class near you, but how could they do it at home? What could they do?
I think it's really tricky because when you're at home, like there's so much that we've got to do. Like as a parent, I just think there's so much that we have to do, and you're constantly being told so many things about what's right to do. So my daughter, my eldest daughter, she's a busybody. She loves being active. She loves being really busy. Like she struggles to sit still. I don't know when I'll ever be able to take her to the pictures because I don't actually think she'll sit still long enough, which is fine. But it's just sort of recognizing when they are tired, to be able to find an activity that they can do that is more gentle for them. And it might be, depending on the age of your child, having that conversation with them to find out what it is that they would enjoy doing that is slower, that is them doing nothing, essentially a bit of a brain break. So for my daughters, where they are younger, sometimes colouring for my 4-year-old is a nice
I
way
love
for
me some colouring.
yeah, and I do it with her. Like, so I've bought some new pens for me, because I find that actually I really like it, and I need to sort of tap into my mindfulness. So I bought myself some colour pens and a new colour book, and sometimes we sit together and we colour. It's not often, but we do sometimes. Whereas with my youngest, like they both can and do need to sit and watch TV for a while. And I know that probably sounds like a bit of a taboo because it's screen time, but it's
Well,
all in
quiet, and it doesn't require your mind, does it? You're right, it's passive entertainment. So yes, you don't want to be on a screen all day long, but it is in those moments sometimes. And you know what it's like as an adult, so I completely can understand, because if I'm really, really busy in my mind and I'm working and I'm doing stuff and I'm experiencing stress, and ultimately that's part of life, and and it's not like I'm not stressed, but I'm experiencing stress because and I get to a point where, I don't know if you have this, but if you have to decide what to have for dinner, and I'm like, I'm at capacity for decisions. And actually, to be honest, a 20-minute Big Bang Theory or whatever it is for me means, because I'm able to consume it passively and just be switched off, I'm not thinking, and I completely can understand that would be, once in a while, really great for a child too, because you're being entertained, but you're not having to think or having to learn. Is that right? I don't know. I mean, you're the expert here. I'm just sort of saying things, but
no, I think you're right, and I think it is sort of all in moderation. When I think about my children's days, like they're not sat in front of a screen. They've actually been out. And that is the reason they actually need to sit. And if I don't put that TV on, they will not sit. It's also a time for me to sort of physically connect with them. And this is something I personally do struggle with. And I think a lot of mums probably do, to actually sit with your child. It's not because we don't want to, but you see everything that needs to be done. But sitting and connecting with your child and having that cuddle with them, especially after they've been at school where they've been away from you, but also been bombarded with a whole lot of things that they have to do mentally, having that time with you on the sofa. And they do say, like, it only takes 10 minutes of just connecting with you can be a lot to regulate them and calm them. So it doesn't necessarily even have to be that they're doing an activity off on their own or something like that, but actually having that time with you, not speaking, cuddling, having a snack on the sofa for about 10-15 minutes is sort of like just what they need. And probably, to be honest, like just what you need to actually slow down. And after you've been rushing through the morning and rushing through pickup and doing work and everything else in between that 6-hour window, to be able to sit with your child could I know, like, I have to force myself to, so I don't say this advice lightly, but I think it's, when I get to, it's really nice for me, and my daughter is better for it. Like, she's calmer, she's nicer, she's not as ratty, and that is regulation. Like, we know regulation when we've got babies, to be holding and cuddling them, and as they get older, it's hard to know what that looks like, but it is that it's just spending time with them. And as you know, and as they get older, they'll have different interests. So I think, like, with my very young daughter, my 2-year-old, like, sometimes when she was like really tired but really struggling to be calm, I said, do you want to get the Play-Doh out? And it's sensory, and she likes that. And that was nice and calm for her. But with older children, it can be music as well. Like, they do really like listening to music and just chilling out and listening. Or if they've got like a Yoto player or something like that, where they can, again, just sort of passively listen to something and tune out. Like, a lot of the children that we teach in schools, I've realized actually this week, I got them to do a sun salutation on their own and to work on their own breathing. And I said, how, you know, we had some feedback on what that was like for them. And some of them they looked like they just had gone somewhere else. And I said, do you find it hard to do that bit on your own, because you're having to mentally concentrate a lot more on that sequence, whereas when I tell you, you've just sort of zoned out and it's a bit of a break for you? And I said, yeah. I said, well, that's the same for me when I go to a yoga class. I said, I don't really think, I do, because I'm listening to what my teacher's saying, but I'm not thinking about anything else, so I get a bit of a brain break from life. So it's almost like a very long guided meditation in a way that's active. And I've realized that for some of the children that we teach, that's what a yoga class is for them. Like, they're going through the motions of it, but it's passive or less taxing mentally on them, and therefore relaxing. So something along those lines for them can be quite nice. But I think what the main thing is that it has to resonate with them as relaxing. Like, they've got to identify that this is something that brings me joy and I find easy to do.
Yeah.
But having that time, and it doesn't have to be long, but it's I think it's a real challenge to slow down.
Yeah, definitely. And it is interesting what you said there as well about it being right for them, because one person's rest is not somebody else's. Like, I love to color and I like to do it well, but that's not necessarily something else someone else would do. But my stepdaughter, she like loves crafts, and for instance, I had a origami book for ages, and I got it out. She's 16, and I, for some reason, I'm very creative, but I cannot make origami. I can't do it. And then within second, like, not even lying, 5-10 minutes, she made this. And I was like, how did you do that? She's like, I just followed it. So then I had to go. I couldn't do it. And just so quite often she'll just sit there and do origami, and it's just so I can feel the calm. Whereas for me, I'm like, this is really, really stressing me out, because I'm quite creative. I'm good at things like this, and this is not calming me. So it is different for each person. I just thought that was so impressive. And also just a little funny colouring story. So I don't know if any other parents have this, but we do like to colour, and ultimately so my two stepdaughters now are pretty much grown up. They're 14 and 16, but over the years we've done lots of colouring, and I always remember, so my other half, he loves to colour, and we've got, you know, really beautiful intricate colouring books, which we've not done in ages because they are grown up, but sometimes if my nieces and nephews come, we do it. And you could just guarantee as an adult, just fair warning, it might not be so calming for you if you colour next to a child, because Olivia, who was always is the youngest, Martin would colour and he'd sort of really work hard on his, and then Liv would kind of colour hers, even when she was a bit older, and it would be out the lines of it. She'd get a bit bored, and then she'd say, "Oh, Daddy, yours is so nice. Can I work on yours?" And you could just see Martin be like, "Sure." Just like it's half an hour of hard work. So just fair warning. I'm sure that's parent life generally, but like, yeah, let me share. But just so funny, there's all these books, there's just these beautiful well-colored bits of like a scribble on the side. Or that's just not in the lines, or it's not the same color, and every time I could just see him being like just like not calm at all. Van, this has been so lovely. It's just been so nice getting to know you a little bit. Can't believe it's been half an hour already. So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. I want to get you back here to go more into more depth about your knowledge and studies. I know you're just continuing to learn, and yeah, whenever I speak to you, I feel like I learned something new. So thank you so much for your time. And we'll have you back soon.
Good, thank you. Thanks everyone.